Hi everyone, it's Alexa Linton here, and I'm so excited that you're joining us tonight for our final Whole Horse Apprenticeship webinar. I am joined tonight by one of my absolute favorite people in the whole wide world, and an amazing animal intuitive or translator, she likes to call herself, and healer, Miss Laura Bird, or I don't know if I call you Miss or what we should call you, but Laura Bird's here, and she's coming to us from all the way from Perth, Australia. And yeah, I just love this gal. She has such a great, amazing way of sharing her information, and a simple way that we can start to learn about animal communication and just open up this whole concept. And yeah, I'm so excited you're here, Laura, and I'm going to let you share a little bit more about your story. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Oh my God, thank you. Thank you for such a beautiful introduction, and it's such an honor to be included in what I think is just an amazing program. I love this idea of the whole horse apprenticeship, and yeah, it's a real privilege. I've just been Ruby, my little dog, has just been like rustling the backdrop and like making herself known, and now she's staring at me from the little patch of sunshine across the way. It's morning here in Perth, so good morning from Perth. And yeah, I suppose I better tell you a little bit about like what I'm doing and how I have come to discover the stuff I've come to discover.
Yes, please.
So I've always been just nuts about animals. When I was a kid, I used to like hang out with my friends' pets when I went to visit them and play with their pets rather than hang out with them. And I'm actually very lucky that they're still friends with me. We're all catching up for dinner on Friday night. But they, from a very young age, I was just crazy about animals. And I actually did have animals speak to me when I was a child. So that was, over time, something that got a little bit kind of knocked out of me. I got in trouble for a few things. I released the class mice that we had in year 3 because they wanted to get out. So I was like, okay, I can help with that. That was the first detention I ever got. And so just over time, like I lost touch a little bit with my animal communication. I still loved animals, but I guess I just wasn't as attuned to it because I was told that it was all rubbish and I was making it up. And so I stopped listening. Mm-hmm. And then it's probably actually about 16 years ago now, I got really sick, and I started to have severe attacks of vertigo. It was really debilitating. I couldn't drive. It was actually in my left ear. I couldn't drive. I couldn't ride my horses. And it made me have to think about a different way that I could spend time with my animals. So I got involved with Bowen therapy, which is a hands-on therapy for animals. It's an Australian therapy. And I was involved with that. I still am. I still use it as a big part of my practice. Mm-hmm. And what was kind of cool about that for me at the time was that I was touching and engaging with a lot of animals that were not my own, that I didn't know, and that I had to be open to and present to. And I started to notice that old thing was coming back. So I would know things about the animals. I'd sometimes have memories of what had happened to the animal. Like that's what it felt like, was like a memory, like, oh, I remember how you hurt yourself. Or I remember that you said you didn't like this particular thing, and I didn't know this animal from a bar of soap. So it was really interesting. And over the years that I've been a natural therapies practitioner for animals, I just kept exploring it more and more. I had a massive resistance to teaching animal communication because I think there's a lot of, am I allowed to say bullshit? There's a lot of like bullshit out there. And I think people's egos get really wrapped up in this whole thing of like, oh, the poor animal, and we don't actually acknowledge that the animals are activating us and teaching us, and that they are not victims in that exchange, that, you know, that we are not superior and necessarily helping them, that they're helping us as much as we are helping them.
For sure.
And that became like a massive part of when I finally did, when I couldn't kind of resist it anymore, when the animals were pushing me more and more to teach what I had learned from them. That was a massive part of the cycle that they'd shown me about how healthy energy exchanges, whether that's communication or in a healing capacity, how healthy ecological exchanges complete, so that both parties are left richer and clearer from it. So that I'm sharing with you today is ecological communication cycle, so that it really does, as time goes by, we are continually getting clearer in the information that we're able to pick up. And I think it's super important for especially for healers, because I teach a lot of animal therapists and human therapists as well. I think it's a really important piece of it to kind of really complete the cycle, whereas the human way a lot of the time is that we disconnect from things and we say, that's not me, and animals are continually showing us that they are our mirrors. And so, like, what's the balance between them being our mirror and them sharing something about us, and us being able to accurately pick up information that is relevant to them?
Yeah, absolutely. What a journey you've been on.
It's been massive, and it's like the best thing ever, and I have the best job in the world, because all day, every day, I get to play with animals and make magic, and yeah, it's awesome. Awesome. Even now, I wish I could show you. I'm like surrounded. I've got my little cat sitting like right down here, and Ruby, my little kelpie, is staring at me, and all the horses have been milling around and shoving on the gate. If I let them out, they would be like knocking the laptop off my little table here.
Yeah, Laura did a little tour with me earlier, and she is not lying. They are hanging out. Being a part of it for sure, and sort of helping things along here. So I'd love to like dive a little more into that, Laura. You talked about this sense of completing that cycle and understanding that we help our animals as much as they help us. Can you go into that a little bit more of kind of what you've seen around that?
Definitely. So where do I start? What I want to share with you today is what I consider to be of like a foundation principles of animal communication, but also that these are principles that are applicable like way beyond developing our intuitive skills. So they're things that are relevant for healers. I was I'm part of an amazing group of people. We caught up in Sydney. We all do different kinds of teaching and speaking. And one of the girls was saying, well, like, I work for the government and I run meetings, like how is this relevant for me? And what was really interesting was that these basic like ecological principles, the natural primal things that I think the animals have to teach with us or teach us about, are actually applicable in our lives in all aspects. So I guess this 5-part cycle is something that is part of my animal communication activation class. And the idea is that when we know and we understand and we honor all parts of the cycle, that even if we don't get it right all of the time, even if we struggle with our intuitive gifts initially, and all of us have the ability to connect. This is something that's natural and primal. The animals communicate like this with their environment all of the time, and we can communicate with them and the environment in this same way. And when we really honor each part of it, we get better and better. Whereas if we skip a part, the cycle isn't complete. So we can't sort of like elevate ourselves and improve ourselves.
Right.
And I've sent through a little picture of the cycle that you can totally share with the Whole Horse Apprenticeship group. But what I want to do is maybe just start like talking you through those 5 parts of the cycle.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you know, I know a lot of the gals in your group are like horse people. They're avid horse people. They really love their horses. And so I think that even this is applicable when we ride our horses, or when we work our horses, or when we're building relationship with our horses. So if you know, maybe some of you are not necessarily wanting to develop animal communication abilities, but these like principles are applicable across the board. So if you are trying to develop your animal communication abilities, if you've had those little moments, maybe you've had dreams, maybe you've had experiences where you've just known something or felt something and it's been proved to be right, and you don't know what the next step is, like, you know, what if I could have this happen all the time? What if I could live in this space? For me, that's what these steps are about. So I'm just going to like list off the 5 steps to begin with. The first one is that we need to neutralize ourselves. We need to be in a place where we feel a little less busy with all of our stuff. So I call this part neutralizing. And, you know, there's been huge like health benefits lately of like alkalizing your body and yoga breathing and all this stuff that kind of like takes our molecules down a little bit, makes us more present and more in the moment. And so the neutralizing process is really important because it also changes our brainwave frequency a little bit. It's a little bit that like daydreamy place that you get to sometimes when you're driving and your thoughts, like you end up having these like amazing bits of inspiration. It's a little bit similar to the headspace that you're in just before you fall asleep or just when you're waking up. So often in that place, we remember our dreams. We remember all the stuff that happened in our dreams. And then the moment that we're properly awake and we start thinking, oh, wow, I should really write that down. Where's the pen? Where's the paper? Straight away, we're in a different brainwave state and we can't access. So that's the space that we want to get to with this idea of neutralizing. And the one thing, this is like the hardest part because human beings are not really great at neutralizing. We tend to have an agenda all the time. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and especially when it comes to animal communication, one of the biggest things that I see across the board in my students is they're worried about getting stuff right or wrong. And when you are in that place, you're not very neutral. So often animals will really ask us to remain in a neutral place until we really let go and shed all of our kind of mental baggage around what we need to achieve out of the exercise. So, you know, just if you try these steps at home and you want to give it a go and you want to sit with your animals and you worry that nothing is happening, just be aware that it's not that nothing's happening, it's just that the animals are holding you in the place of practicing the neutralizing process. So nothing is never nothing, it's always something. And I can't tell you how like much practice I've had to have at going, nothing could happen and I have to be okay with that.
Totally.
I might sit down to do a communication session with an animal and nothing comes. And once I get really okay with that, that's when step 2 happens, which is the second part of the cycle, is that this feeling of permission opens up. So we are receiving permission from the animal. It's a little bit like when the phone line finally connects, or you know, it's the receiver picks up at the other end, and you've got and there's something there. Whereas the neutralizing process is like you've got to be patient and just let it ring, you know.
Right. Forever and ever,
and not be like, where are they? Why aren't they picking up? So. Okay, if they're busy right now, I'm okay with that. I'll just leave a message and I was going to say,
little voicemail.
Yeah, I'll just leave a voicemail. So receiving permission is the feeling of a frequency opening up between you. So we've all had this feeling when we've been really connected to somebody, and often it doesn't need to be somebody that we know really well. Sometimes you'll just instantly connect with someone. There's this feeling of a click, and I really believe that that's like you meeting each other on a rapport frequency where you're finding each other, and this is, I think, why the neutralizing process is so important, because often when we are not in a place of being neutral, we're pushing a lot of energy out. There's a lot of, we're talking at the animal, or we are like if you meet someone for the first time, are you really like listening to them? Are you present to them? Or are you just trying to tell them who you are and project who you are? And so the neutralizing process seems to make it possible to really find that rapport frequency with the animal. And in that moment, often information will already begin to flow. So we are already, once we're over that permission hump, we begin to move into the part of the cycle that is about listening or receiving information. And we can receive that with all of our senses. So that's something that we can get into like a little bit more as we get talking. So we start to move into the listening phase, and then we move into the inquiring phase of the cycle. So this is always something that like I often will throw a question out there, because in some ways for human beings it doesn't seem entirely logical for us to listen before we question, for us to listen before we inquire. But I actually think it's like one of the most important parts of the cycle. Have you found that as well, Alexa, like with the work that you do, that the kind of the order of those two things is a little reversed?
Yeah, I think that sometimes when I get ahead of myself, and I jump into my inquiry, I think my clarity is less. I think and you're right, it's also a rapport building, because if we look at animals and how they translate and how they do things, it's the settling in to the listening that kind of almost creates the trust, the rapport, are part of it, and the ability to kind of actually, have more information, coming through. So I think, there's definitely, and I've noticed that for myself, like, I kind of get agenda focused sometimes, and, in this work. And so it's like when I can back up the train up and just kind of sit in that space, it's a much different experience.
Definitely. I'd love to share a little experience that I had that I think sums it up like so beautifully. Because often what I find is that we humans, we have, and my human clients, when they call me out to do animal communication work or healing work, they have in their mind what they think is maybe going on, or they have a series of questions that they want to ask. And those questions are based on their like assumption of what maybe is happening or what the problem is. And so often animals don't get an opportunity to kind of like set the topic of conversation. That's always directed.
Yeah, so true. Yeah.
So I went to visit a little horse down south here in Albany, which is about like 4 hours drive away. And this little horse had been, he'd been a really good pony for the young girl who was about 9, and they'd been doing pony club together. And all of a sudden he had become really a bit aggressive and had begun bucking her off at times, and was sort of presenting with like really kind of angry and dangerous behavior. So I actually was called out because they wanted me to find out if he was sore somewhere, if there was physical pain in his body, and that maybe the saddle wasn't fitting him, and there was, so they had in their mind a bunch of questions that they wanted addressed when I came out. Was there pain somewhere? Had something happened? And that was really like a massive part of what they wanted me to address with him. But what I noticed when I initially went over to him, so I'd done my neutrality, and I'd kind of gone in and thought, well, let's just see what happens. And the moment that the permission opened up, it was like, and so this is a really like cool example of sometimes how permission can vary as well. What actually began to happen was that he didn't want me to touch him. There was permission, but there was not the permission to touch.
Yes.
And the permission opened up, and all that happened was all this like swearing came out of him, you know, and I won't repeat what he said, but it was pretty vile. He was, you know, he really was like, get away from me, you know, and really just rage, anger, just all this emotion.
Wow.
To the point that they were holding him and he was going crazy on the end of the lead. And so rather than kind of go, oh, look, let's see if he's sore, I actually just sat in that space. So I just really listened to him. And the questioning or the inquiring didn't go down the path that I thought it would. I actually let him present what he wanted to talk about. So we put him in a yard, and he proceeded to rage and carry on. And then all of a sudden he became very, very sad. And what he told me was that one of the little ponies that lived in the paddock next door had died unexpectedly, and that he felt responsible because he was a herd leader and he included them in his herd. And at the time that the pony got ill with colic and died, he couldn't do anything. He couldn't notify anybody. There was nothing he could do. So he had all of this rage on top of all of this sadness. And in that time, he really hadn't ever grieved or rested properly. So as we were crying with him, he laid down and slept, like lay down at like flat out and slept. And, you know, for you guys that got horses, that's like a weird thing to have happen.
Yeah.
Like it was really odd. And he was like fast asleep. And the owners were saying, well, they'd never even seen him lay down. So that was just a really like interesting example of, had I gone in with my own questions or my own assumptions, straight away I would have popped out of this place of neutrality.
Yes.
So, you can bounce back on the cycle and things would not have gone the way they did. So when he actually got up after this experience, he was completely different. He went out into the paddock and just was like really dreamy, and the behavior basically changed instantly after that. And there was no need to do any hands-on work. But the listening and the questioning, you know, and we did ask a series of questions of him. We went deeper with all of that when he began to present what he wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
But really, you know, like how often do we really listen to animals, and how often do we really let them decide the topic of conversation? So much of our like training and interaction with them is us really limiting what they're allowed to express and dictating what isn't appropriate. And this horse's behavior was absolutely like not appropriate, you know, and would have been very scary for the little girl that was.
I can imagine if he was holding that much. Yeah.
And yet it was absolutely the key thing to having him release whatever he was going through and then be able to move beyond that. So I have so many examples of, if we'd just gone straight in with questions rather than really listening, the balance would have been wrong and we would have popped out of that place of neutrality.
Wow, that's so cool. I mean, we've talked a lot in this our time together over the last 8 months about this concept of holding space and just really allowing whatever needs to rise up or, you know, be present to be present. And so that is just like another kind of confirmation or affirmation of that, you know, that whole concept and how powerful that can be. And I think, I would even extend your, idea of listening. I don't think we necessarily even listen to each other or even ourselves very well. I think it's an area where we can all use a little bit of refinement and practice, I would say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. It is the art of holding space. And when we hold space, there needs to be an acceptance of whatever is present in the environment, not to try and manage that or, there's a kind of a peace or listening that is possible when we stop trying to modify or change things, when we stop trying to label things, when we just are for a moment present to what is. And that's actually the space that really cool healing stuff happens in. So, and communication is healing. How many of us have gone and had a really good chat with a friend over a cup of coffee and it's changed everything?
Totally.
Everything. Yeah, because being heard, like really being heard and really being understood is something that we can all have more of. And like you said, even for ourselves, we often don't even give ourselves that space. We're continually trying to manage our emotions or push things down because they're not appropriate. And that's okay. We all live busy lives and we have to function. But what animals really have to teach us, I think, is, exactly, Kia. What animals really have to teach us is that, whether it's appropriate or not, we have to make space somewhere in our lives to let whatever needs to rise up, to listen to whatever is happening, and to do that without the intention of fixing it or changing it, or it's just a human thing. But actually often we don't need to do anything. Once we just acknowledge and notice it, that's actually all that needs to happen. And that was just another massive thing that little horse told me, was I thought I was out there to do a healing session, and really all I was there to do was listen. The questioning part of it was just a way for me to more fully understand
what was happening for him.
Yeah.
So it's a clarifying process at that point of what was coming up for him. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah.
And for me, that questioning, the part 4 in the cycle is really a place where you sound out your own senses. So it's a way of questioning, like, what's coming through, what do I see, what do I hear, what do I feel, what do I know, are there any other sensations that are coming? And then from there you can ask clarifying questions about that. So you can inquire into those different senses, which is actually the information often I feel is already there. The inquiring process is a way for us to begin to notice things more specifically when we're not that well practiced at paying attention to those things.
Of course. And I'd love to get into this because I talk a lot about the subtle senses, and I think it can get confused with this idea of psychic stuff, and people get a little standoffish about it, to be perfectly honest. And I for me, what I've come to understand is this idea that we can have we have our normal set of senses, and then we have our subtle set of senses, and these are all completely natural aspects of who we are. So do you want to you talked a little earlier about the subtle senses. I'd love to hear more around that and just more sharing and
Definitely. Well, I think that I agree with you. I think these things are always present all of the time. And often, especially like our subtle sense of feeling things. So many people have that, where they'll walk into a space and they'll sense the energy in that space, and they'll have an emotional or an energetic response to that. And actually, I think that in a lot of ways that is a really primal, animalistic way of us sensing what's happening in the environment, because our survival depends on that. And we're lucky, the world we live in, a lot of the time our survival doesn't depend on that, but we are socially complex beings. You know, human social interaction is incredibly subtle and has lots of different nuances to it. And so even though our survival may not be based on it, socially, our sensing of what's happening in an environment is still really, really important for us. So we all have subtle senses, and they actually connect us across time and space. So we tend to think of our real senses being something that is like where we can sense what is present in the moment. So if you guys now all went into your kinesthetic and just became aware of the feel of your bum on the seat that you're sitting on as you're watching this webinar, or the temperature on your skin, or the sensation of your clothing on your skin, and if you have any areas of pain in your body, those are all ways for you to connect with what's happening right now, in this moment right now. But there is also information a lot of the time that we can perceive. Our subtle senses connect us to like other things that are happening. So if you were to remember a time where you felt really, really happy, like really ecstatically happy, and then all of a sudden that feeling becomes present in your body now. Or if you were to remember a time when you felt sadness, and a lot of the time if we're recounting a sad story, especially if we're remembering maybe the loss of a loved one or a loved animal, the emotion becomes present in our body now. So it's like it's a way of making us realize that everything is present in this space now. And the same thing happens visually, you know, so I certainly don't have any like weird psychic visions that, you know, blast me back on my chair and throw me to the ground. And, you know, like I look at some of these like psychic shows or, you know, supernatural shows, and that's absolutely not how I experience visions, but I do get visions. And I think a lot of the time people miss what they are like because we're actually so used to having them all the time when we remember stuff. So if you were to now remember what your bedroom looked like when you were a child, like was there a pattern on the bedspread that you recall? What colour were your walls? What posters did you have hanging on your walls? And that memory of what that looks like, that is the kind of vision that you get when you have a subtle sense of vision or a subtle sight. And so what happens, I feel, with subtle senses is that they bring other moments or other experiences in the sort of in the cosmic field or in the universal experience of being, the universal consciousness, they bring them into the now for us. And a lot of us are living in our subtle senses all the time because we're not truly present. So what's really cool about bringing ourselves into the present and neutralizing ourselves and being in the present is that we create enough space that the other subtle senses that we're continually engaged in, like thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow and visualizing how that conversation is going to go with your work colleague, or worrying about something that happened yesterday, and all the emotions and feelings, and, you know, you might have internal chatter that goes with that. When we neutralize, we bring ourselves into the present and we allow something else to come in. So we increase our bandwidth. We expand our filters a little bit. And often, if, you know, I've certainly had this experience with my horses. Toby, you're getting your claws stuck in my jumper again. Often what I experience with my horses is that if I don't neutralize myself before I go and spend time with them, they will mirror back to me whatever is happening in my subtle senses anyway. So if I'm feeling a bit of anger or frustration, if I'm a little bit like down on myself, I'll have an experience with my horses that mirrors that to me, which is all that happens is you are having more of a conversation with yourself than you are with the animal.
Yes.
Yeah. So in some way, and if it's okay with you, I'm going to skip to step 5, because I feel like in a way we've kind of looped back there now anyway.
Can we run through them? So we've got neutralizing.
Neutralizing is part 1 of the
Part
cycle.
1. Okay.
Yeah. Receiving
Permissions.
permission, receiving permission is part 2, and that's really where the feeling of the rapport frequency opening up occurs.
Mm-hmm.
And just quickly while I'm on that point, because we just talked about, like, if you're not neutral, and how many of us are ever 100% neutral anyway? It's like impossible. We have to make an effort, we have to give it a crack. We have to like make a little bit of time and space for it, but it's almost impossible to be entirely neutral, because we are the collection of all our experiences, and we can only see the world as we are, not as it truly is.
Yes.
However, we can begin to expand that a little bit. And so the less neutral we are, the more relevant our intuition is going to be to what's happening for us. And the more, so the less neutral we are, the more it's going to be relevant to us. I don't know if I said that right. And then the less neutral we are, the more neutral we are, the more relevant it may be about the animal, because we're less connected to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So then step 3 is where the listening process happens, and that is almost going to happen like straight away. That part of the cycle is going to happen the moment that the feeling of connection is there. There'll already be feelings and sensations, and that's something that I want to come back to a little bit, because I feel like there's a really important piece there that we need to retrieve when we're practicing our intuition.
Awesome.
Step 4 is the inquiring process. So that's when we can really like feel into our subtle senses and become like really notice what's happening, because sometimes we will delete things that are going on just because we haven't paid attention to them. Mm-hmm. So we have only so much ability to notice anything that's happening in our day-to-day lives. If we received all the information that was coming into us all the time, our heads would explode and we'd all be bleeding out of our ears. So we're kind of continually filtering that. And the inquiring process for me is a place where, just to like feel out all the corners of the information that's coming through, to really explore those subtle senses is important. And then step 5 is actually, I feel like it's the most important part. This is the part that really, when I consulted with the animals when I was creating the teaching program, it was like the absolute non-negotiable. Mm-hmm. And it kind of brings us back to neutrality, and it makes it possible for us to be more neutral in the future. But it's the step that I call reflection and honoring. Mm-hmm. And we spoke just a minute ago about how it's impossible to be entirely neutral, and any conversation we have with anyone else, we can't ever really hear them clearly. We're hearing them through our own filters, and we're interpreting that based on our other knowledge and our other experiences. And the reflection and honoring part is really the moment where we sit quietly with ourselves and recognize that whatever it was that we experienced from that animal, whatever it was that we felt, whatever it was that we noticed, that there was a part of us that reflects. That there is actually a gift of awareness in that we may not have had without the experience with that animal. Mm-hmm. So like this part of the process came for me because I was doing a lot of energy work, and I was hearing a lot of stuff. I was hearing a lot of bullshit about like protecting yourself and like disconnecting and not taking negative energy on, and it just didn't really sit well with me. When I looked at like herd situations or pack dynamics, I realized that all of those animals were really beautifully connected, and that when one had a positive healing experience, that they all benefited from that. Mm-hmm. And that they were kind of in a place of oneness, that they didn't feel separate the way that humans often feel separate. And it just didn't make sense to me that I could be having these amazing healing experiences with animals, these beautiful magical moments, and that somehow that might harm me. Mm-hmm. So what I began to realize was that if there was any residual energy, or I felt a particular way after the session, that it was because I hadn't completed the cycle properly. What I hadn't done was reflect and honor the payment from the animal, which is a moment of, Laura, what do you now know about yourself through this experience that you didn't know before? What is the learning, the magic that I can integrate, the healing that I can experience as a result of witnessing what had happened with the animal? And so it's a simplified thing to say that the animal is a reflection of me, and whatever the animal was going through was what I was going through. I think that's a little simple. Mm-hmm. But certainly there would always be some resonance. There would always be something that I felt that I had left that situation being enriched about. And maybe I had to go do some work on myself afterwards. You know, maybe there was some emotion that I needed to process, and it was, you know, I needed to go have a healing session of my own around that. But it always felt like a sense of completion and actual gratitude for the animal and what the animal had allowed me to experience when I reflected and honored on that. So rather than at the end of the session going, well, I've done my job, cut those cords, go and wash my hands, put a bubble around myself and retreat within myself again, it actually was a way of like really embracing that and recognizing that the animal had given me an amazing gift. Mm-hmm. And what began to happen when I started doing that process was that the process of neutrality and the neutralizing step became easier. Mm-hmm. The rapport frequency opened up much faster. The receiving of permission happened much faster. And what I was able to listen to and inquire about was broader. It felt like it was and having experiences that are much bigger than what I thought I would be able to, because each time I communicate or do a healing, there is this feeling of expansion or elevation or a broadening of my senses and experiences. So the reflection and honoring process became just like the most important part.
Yeah, I could totally see that. And I'm going to, I love that you shared that, because even for myself, I think that I do it sort of subconsciously a little bit, but definitely, I want to bring that more onto a conscious level into the work that I do and into this work. And I would love it, Laura, if you had, do you have a example maybe of that you might want to share with the group?
Yeah, totally. And I know I still want, there's another little piece so actually there's an example that I can give you that both illustrates. I wanted to share with you something that is really, I think, happens for a lot of people when they begin to practice their intuition. And your intuition is a muscle. It does take practice. It gets better and better the more you use it. And it gets better and better the more you use it if you honor every piece of the cycle. If you really complete the 5 parts of the cycle, it's going to be much easier to strengthen those muscles, those intuitive muscles. So I want to give you an example of, and it actually was probably a communication session that for me happened in a way that I felt like it hadn't been successful. And then when I began to look at it in terms of the 5 ecological parts of the cycle, I realized that it was enormously successful. Okay. So Years ago, I was invited to a group. A friend of mine was teaching an animal communication, like a little 8-part series. And so I'd gone along to support her. And she passed around a photo of this beautiful Alsatian. And she just kind of just passed the photo around and said the question, I just want you to like ask this dog where they came from. And as I looked at the photo of the dog, the very first thing that came into my mind was an ocean. So I could just see the ocean and the waves on the sand. And then as quick as that had happened, I thought about like how nuts that was. And, of course, this dog hadn't come out of the ocean. And so then I saw a chain mesh fence and concrete. So I saw kennels. I saw concrete and the metal chain mesh divisions. And so I saw that. So when we all went around the circle afterwards and it came to me, I said, I saw a kennel. I saw, I described it, the concrete on the floor and the partition divisions and the steel and the concrete essentially. So after the whole group had completed talking about it, and, people had picked up different things. Some people had seen a kennel and one lady had seen some bush trails. And the owner of the dog described what had happened with the dog. And the dog had come from a kennel. And she'd been bred as a guard dog. And so that was all really correct and verified. And I felt very, very chuffed with myself that I hadn't got it wrong. And then she told us that when she first got the dog was quite distant and dissociated, very disconnected and not affectionate, not present, and she'd had the dog for several months and she was like that. And then one day they took her to the beach. And I get emotional even thinking about it because for me it was the gift that the dog gave me in recognizing what had occurred. So they took the dog to the beach and she went into the ocean, and when she came out she was completely transformed. She was totally transformed. It was like she'd been healed by the ocean or she'd been reborn. So this hit me like a ton of bricks. I went, fuck, I got that, and I deleted it because I didn't think it made sense.
Yeah.
It didn't make sense to me. And it did. It was this moment of recognition that the gift the dog had given me to let go of what was right and wrong.
Yeah.
To translate whatever happened, no matter like how crazy it sounded. And the recognition that often what happens in that space before we think we're doing the communication is the most important part. It's like waking up from a dream when you remember all of the dream, and then the moment you begin to think about it, the moment you begin to really question it, this is why listening must come before inquiring, because the moment we begin to question, we lose a little bit of our neutrality and we begin to try and frame or fit the information into human context. So it was the most amazing process. It was completely, that dog absolutely, what she showed me initially was I came from the ocean. I was born out of the ocean, and I will remember her always because she really taught me to not be afraid about getting it wrong. And so the reflecting and honouring part of that communication was what is the greatest thing that I could learn from this? What is the piece that I could take away that will allow me to be even clearer, to neutralise even more deeply in the future, and to be a more accurate translator that doesn't want to put my meaning onto things, but that really honours the animal's meaning. And so that was like massive. And had I not reflected on it, or had I not been so reflective as to go, what was the gift for me in that, I would have gone, oh, I got that. I totally got that. I got that at the beginning and I just didn't say anything, like
yes.
really received the gift. I wouldn't have really been present to receiving the gift. So it's super important to me that we are respectful and humble and grateful for what the animals are giving us when we have the opportunity to listen to them.
Amazing. Thank you.
Oh, it's so my pleasure. It's so my pleasure. There are so many ways to do each of these steps, and there's so many ways that they occur. And, like I teach a whole 2-day thing about all of that.
Yeah.
But what I really wanted to share with your people was that once you understand that those 5 things always happen in a complete cycle,
yeah.
and that the reflecting and honouring part is so crucial to us learning and becoming better at the process, then in whatever context you're using this, you can get better and better and better, and you'll find your own ways to go through it.
I love it. I love it. And so we're sort of veering towards 8 o'clock. Laura, did you want to do like a little exercise, or is there other pieces you wanted to share here?
We absolutely could. We could open up. I don't know if there are any questions.
I was going to say, yeah.
And if there's not, then maybe we can do an exercise. Certainly, like what I've sent to you is like a little illustration of the 5 parts of the ecological communication cycle. And I also do want to make available for everybody through, I'll send it to you and you can get it up on their membership page. I have a little exercise for neutralizing, and then lots of different ways that you can neutralize yourself. If you do yoga or meditation, those are wonderful ways to do it. I have a little exercise that's like a recorded meditation, and the neutralizing part, because it's step 1. Ruby, she's having a little bark in the background, and she's deaf as a post, so I can't actually call her back. Like, I can't hear. Yeah. So, but the neutralizing part, because it's step 1, it's often where we get stuck.
Yep.
So to just have something tangible to do in that space so that we can expand it and get better at it, and so that our human mind doesn't like get in our way when we're trying to practice, that we can just go, it's okay, I'll just keep neutralizing, so that we can be comfortable in that first part of the process. That's going to make a massive difference.
Absolutely. And
I'll give that to you.
I'll
give that to you, great. And then everyone can access that and listen to my Australian accent on there.
I love it. I love listening to that so much. I'm trying to think if we've listened to it yet, but in this program as well, neutralization has actually been a big aspect of things, because for doing healing work and starting horsemanship practice and all these things, it's so critical to like you say, the listening process, and to being present to what the needs are in that moment. And so, it's such a essential part of all of it.
It's, I think what happens when we are really neutralized in ourselves is that we shift our sense of certainty from an external thing to an internal thing. So, what happens is, so much of the time we're trying to control our animals, we're worried about our safety and what's happening in the environment, and we're trying to manage that by controlling what's outside of ourselves. Whereas for me, the sense of neutralizing is when the sense of certainty shifts inside. So I become really certain that no matter what happens in that communication session, no matter what begins to flow or doesn't flow, whatever comes up, no matter how crazy it seems or irrelevant it seems to what problem may be presenting, like I just become certain that whatever comes up is going to be okay, and I'm going to be able to navigate it, and I'm going to be able to be of service in that. And when that sense of certainty shifts to an internal place, and it's not dependent on anything that's happening outside of me, I find that the animals really respond to that. So, somebody once said to me that the most attractive quality in the universe is certainty. And if we look at the horses that the horses that become herd leaders.
Yes. That's so funny, because I think of Diva, and I always say she's just known herself. Like from the beginning, she's just known herself, and she is, very much like the undisputed herd leader, and that's a part of it. And I think, your herd leader is the same, just this, what I've heard referred to as core confidence, or just a sense of real knowing of self.
It's a knowing of self, and that doesn't even mean that you necessarily need to know how to do everything, or the moment it starts to become, I know how to do this thing, it's the sense, that's not what it is. It's the sense of whatever happens, I'll find a way. I'm okay to go with it. I don't need the external to be anything, because I bring with me the internal. And then when you have that, back to this concept you said about holding space, then we can open that out into the space. And all of a sudden it transforms the things that are happening outside of us, because we don't need to manage them. We can just experience them, and experience them in a way that is brings value, brings change, brings shift, brings healing.
Beautiful.
So
it's like that concept of the eye of the storm, and then this whole thing can be happening around us, and yet we're still within that space, and it's and we feel stable within ourselves, right? And
it's hard, right? It's it's easy. It takes a lot of practice, and even when you think you get good at it, you're going to get an animal or a situation that comes along in your life that goes, yeah, you got to get better at this. And we are all completely fallible like that. But what I love about this journey is that I get so many opportunities to just continually practice that. And for me, the receiving and honoring part, as a way of really being grateful for what the animals are sharing with me, for acknowledging them as my equals. We're different, but we're equal. Yeah. And if I didn't do that, I also think that at times, the emotions that come up with working with animals, and the way that they open our hearts and make us feel so vulnerable, that would all get too much. But when I receive and honor the gifts that they're giving, it seems to bring me back to that place of core inner certainty.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's beautiful. Thank you. I think we could talk for a whole other hour just on that topic.
I know. I could talk the chair yeah.
Yeah. Me and Laura are really excited. We're gonna start a podcast, so we're pretty excited.
Yeah. So that we can talk and keep talking.
There will be more. But I mean, we could go on and on, but I want to honor your time and the time of the gals that have joined us tonight. And I do want to open up for some questions, if that is okay with you. So I'm just going to unmute these lovelies here. All right, Kayla and Jenny, thank you for being on. Do you gals have any questions?
I don't.
Hi, Kayla.
All good for questions?
Yeah, I don't have any questions.
I've
just got one. When you're talking about how when you're connecting and stuff, and how some certain teachers, when you go to healing, they talk about how liking that flame to protect yourself and stop yourself bringing negativity. Have you ever had a student or yourself where you've been doing some sort of healing, whether it be communication or something else, and you've really lost your confidence, and something's happened to make you lose your confidence, and you've kind of withdrawn from that kind of area?
Sorry, can you repeat that last part again, Jenny? I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure of the link between the flame and the protecting yourself and the confidence thing.
Yeah, because like, you know how you get told things like you've got to protect yourself from negative energies and stuff. And then when you say how some people will, like, you might get a situation where you have to learn from it. How do you put that so you don't lose your confidence to go forward, as opposed to in the back of your mind going, oh my God, I've taken on something negative and it has a really bad mental effect on you?
Yeah, I think that, it can be a bit of an interesting process, because we're all trying to unlearn human belief systems about how energy works. And I've been already chatting with Alexa, like I'm hopefully going to write a blog shortly. I'm new to blogging, but I've got a blog inside me about cutting cords, white lighting, and other spiritual bullshit that that really makes us feel afraid. It makes us feel afraid, and feeling afraid is a number one barrier to really neutralizing. My suggestion, of course, like with working with animals, is you're not going to like put yourself in the lion's den and not feel afraid. You need to work with the lion at an appropriate distance so that you don't feel afraid, and that's obviously part of it as well. We need to acknowledge our need for physical safety. But certainly my experience with energy and what the animals have taught me is that there is like no such thing as like negative energy. It's all just energy. It's all just protons, electrons, and neutrons. And when we really fear something, we give it form. And when we believe that energy behaves in a certain way, that is how it will behave for us. But that's a human thing. And so, I guess my advice in that situation would be to really, I would really dig deep and explore, where did you learn that? Where did you learn, and not even necessarily you, because I know you may be talking about just other things you've experienced, but where does that belief system come from? Who taught you that, and who says that it's real? I've got a really dear friend, and she once said to me, and I absolutely believe this with every fiber of my being, that if it's not love, it's not real. That's all there is in the universe, is love. And love is more powerful than fear, always. Love is always more powerful than fear. So, I think where we're going and what the animals are asking us to do in this next phase of evolution, which is like an internal ascension or an internal mental evolution that human beings are going through in their thinking and in their spirituality, is that we don't need to be afraid anymore. The fear-based spirituality is the old ways. I know we're looking back at a lot of the old ways, a lot of the shamanic ways, and a lot of the Wiccan ways, and there was a lot of fear back then. But actually, we've actually been through a whole cycle of things that have occurred since then. And that's actually not necessary anymore to have those belief systems. So, that stuff's really important as a healer, to really get your belief systems in alignment so that you can be natural with it. I don't think a lot of that fear stuff is not natural. It's not pure. It's human stuff. And we see it in human religions as well, and animals know if it's not love, it's not real.
Yeah, that's actually good.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, you have.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jenny.
It's a great question. I love it. It's a fantastic question, and it's one that gets asked so often, because often when we begin to explore this stuff, we get made to feel a bit afraid about what might happen to us, or what we might pick up, or what we might take on, and that's just kind of not my reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, mine neither anymore. But it was for a time. I definitely went through a phase around that, but it's really shifted, and it's so nice to not, be consumed by that fear anymore, and just to feel really open and able to connect. Yeah.
You know, and again, in the communication cycle, I would really say, like, if that's the thing that comes up for you in all of that, then that needs to be listened to, because it's gonna need to be reflected on. It's going to need to be honored. It's going to need to be integrated. It can't just be like brushed over, because it will be getting in the way of the neutrality and the neutralizing process. It will be affecting your intuitive ability to pick up information on a broader spectrum. And so it's not about even beating yourself up about it. A lot of us are indoctrinated with a lot of stuff. And for me, one of the most interesting and exciting things of working with animals in this way is that, you know, they don't take themselves too seriously. They lick their assholes, and they, you know, like, they just are how they are, and they're unapologetic about it. And there's no bullshit. And yet it's the most amazing, open, tangible heart space. When magic happens with an animal, there's no placebo effect. And so there's something that I'm really curious about exploring, and what it's like, it's about what part of this is not new age woo-woo, but what part of it is actually just us remembering the animal abilities that we have within us, the animal instincts that we have within us, and looking at that from a place of, what was that like in its purest essence before we had culture, before we had belief systems imposed on us, and we were made to feel afraid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Cool.
I love that. Thank you so much for that question, Jenny. I love it.
Thank you, Jenny.
I'm going to write a blog about it, I think.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yay. Well, thank you for being on, Jenny. Thank you for being on, Kayla. And yeah, and Laura, so many thank yous for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. I hope that I didn't ramble too much. I hope that those 5 steps are going to be something that is useful to think about and have in the back of your mind whenever you're doing anything with your horses. And I'll make sure that those 5 steps and the diagram of that, and also a neutralizing exercise are available, so that people can start. They can start with step 1, and they can just start playing and practicing.
Beautiful. Thank you for your generosity with that. And I know that I'm giving it a 2 thumbs up. This was amazing tonight, and I learned a great deal. And I think the other gals, I can see smiles on everybody's faces. So I know that everybody that is watching the replay is, I think, enjoying it as well. So yeah, we're going to stop the recording now. Thank you again, Laura, for being here. If you want to find out more about Laura, you can go to www.onespirit.com.au. Is that right? Okay.
That's
.com.au. So head there. She does amazing workshops and work, and she does come to Canada once a year because she's one of my besties, and I need to see her at least twice a year. So
we have an exchange program.
We do. We also have a red dress exchange program, which is very cool as well, but we'll get into that later. So yes, thank you, Laura, and go check her stuff out. It's really amazing. And I think that's about it. So I'm going to stop the recording now. You guys can stay on for a sec.
Thanks, Alexa. It was awesome.